Explained by the Meier contacts, mysteries, myths, legends, conspiracy theories, historical inaccuracies, and more. Compiled by David Chance, revised 2023 to 10-18.
Abraham, Avrahm, the Avian, the Abraham, see also Jews, the Hebrews. Contact Report 721.
When then, about 13,500 years ago, the up-to-then last Plei-Aran community of immigrants came to Earth, then this happened in a completely secret form. Namely, because since the time of 389,000 years earlier, other extraterrestrials had come to the Earth in the meantime and had settled down far and wide on all continents, above all the long-skulled ones. In ancient Egypt in particular, they rose to positions of power, waged wars, and subjugated tribes of peoples such as those who called themselves Ebrea. It was these who, in later times, under the leadership of a Negrid Plei-Aran descendant called Avian, note meaning of name, he who gives refuge, who was, however, called Avrahm by the Ebrea, had joined forces about 4,500 years ago with the still few distant descendants of the ancient Plei-Aran immigrants who appeared about 13,500 years ago and also begat many descendants. From these descendants begotten between Plei-Aran descendants and the Ebrea, a sixfold lineage of termination then emerged, namely from the reincarnation line of Nacademion, whose spirit form reincarnated several times and in rapid succession among the Ebrea. This was after the then messenger Ijum from the Nacademion line lost his life in the Gobi Desert during the warfare of the Earth immigrant community about 385,000 years ago, and his spirit form either remained in the earthly realm or migrated and returned, about which unfortunately nothing is known in detail. What is known to us, however, is that the old Plei-Aran immigrants very quickly mixed with the above-mentioned tribes of peoples. But it turned out that this time, two unpleasant disputes arose, which led to the fact that despite the efforts of the heralds, various of these peoples split up and partly also fell into bondage to other peoples. However, when I speak of those peoples into which the Plei-Aran immigrants integrated themselves, I am not referring to large peoples, but to larger tribes of peoples that did not correspond to complex forms of social organization. The members of these tribes of peoples, which corresponded to a tribal ethnicity, traced back to a common ancestry, which ensured that a certain mutual cohesion was given as a result of kinship. This, however, did not prevent larger national peoples, who could no longer be called tribes of peoples, but real great peoples or state peoples, from forcibly binding smaller tribes of peoples into servitude. This was also partly the case with the tribes of peoples who had settled around the Mediterranean areas and had mixed with the Plei-Aran immigrants at an early stage, who were then forced into servitude in the land of the ruling long-sufferers. But the same thing happened to the Ebrea, not only by the rulers in ancient Egypt, but also to their distant descendants by the king of the New Babylonian Empire, Nabuchodonosor-I, who is also called Nebuchadnezzar II. The proto-tribal leader of the Ebrea was a very distant Negrid descendant of a Plei-Aran group, who had appeared on Earth as immigrants more than 13,500 years ago, who had also mixed with Earth humans, this proto-tribal leader called Avian, living in a land area called Plecht, east of the Mediterranean, with a nomadic tribe of Ebrea who called him Avrahm.
Now, however, something interests me, namely, you have said that the Plei-Aran descendant named Avian, who appeared among the Ebrea, thus among the early Hebrews, who was then, however, called Avrahm, had been of a negroid nature, so a black-skinned human being, as we say. To that, the question whether this man then also founded a family with the Ibah and fathered offspring.
That was the case, yes, as our handed-down knowledge shows, but this was concealed in the extremely heavily falsified written folk history of the Ibah, as well as all the facts I have mentioned. In addition, the teaching brought to them of Nacademion was extensively rejected, and an untrue religious story was invented to the contrary, just as in the same wise was the history of the origin of the Ibah people's tribes and their descendants. Truthfully, the records were only written out many decades after the real events by scribes with their own interpretations, ideas, and fantasies, just as was the case with the 6 proclaimers.
Contact Report 770.
According to the belief of the theistic God delusional peoples, they are all chosen and commissioned to spread the faith in God in relation to the one single God throughout the earth. For this purpose, he is said to have made a covenant with Avrahm the African, the father of the early Hebrew people, at a very early time. He then revealed his insane teachings, which he had obviously made up out of his fingers, to the Hebrew people of that time, who recognized the imaginary God and allowed him to lead them over the millennia, before the temple leader Moses came to the fore and seized power, proclaiming himself as leader, and claiming that he had also made a covenant with God on Mount Sinai.
Contact Report 779. The Hebrews in the early days had made apparent friendship with the natives, but then had turned over the glove and taken the land. Although it did not belong to them, new hatred was created. They had been promised the promised land, but it was the wrong one, which the early ancestors of today's Israelis then took possession of. The founder of the original people Hebrano, or whatever they were called, was Avrahm. I don't know exactly anymore, because it's been a long time since I have dealt with this, and besides, much of this and also other knowledge has been lost to me due to the stroke. Unfortunately, only fragments come to mind, so I can no longer put the exact connections together. But I do remember that the founder of the Hebrano, or what they were really called, was a dark-skinned man, a man from Africa, so he was different from what is claimed by the Jewish believers.